Today I'm going to show you everything you need to know about integrating Stripe Connect into your Bubble application. We're going to go through a bunch of things, but you can see here I've split it into three main sections. The first section we're going to deal with is onboarding of merchants. Now, merchants are going to be the people who are selling products or services on your marketplace application. So, for example, if you're running an Airbnb style rental marketplace, the merchants will be the Airbnb hosts. I'm going to show you can process marketplace payments, where you split the payment between the platform, which you'll be running, and the merchant, who is the person who is selling the good or service on your platform. So again, in our Airbnb example, if you're running an Airbnb style marketplace, you will get a percentage of each transaction that occurs on the platform, with the remainder going to the Airbnb host. I'm also going to show you some more complex marketplace payment flows, things like putting a payment on hold, things like delaying payments until a service has been delivered, and finally splitting subscription payments. So if you're running a subscription marketplace like Substack, you can split the monthly subscription between yourself and the writer. I'm going to put timestamps to all of these sections in the description below, so if you do want to skip ahead to a specific part, you can do so. Now, if you're watching this tutorial, you probably know what Stripe Connect is, but for those who don't, a quick overview. Stripe Connect is a product from Stripe that makes it super easy to manage the payments aspect of running a marketplace business. So for example, companies like DoorDash will use Stripe Connect, as will other companies like Shopify, OpenTable, and even X as of late, apparently. This tutorial does assume that you have registered for a Stripe account and that you have enabled Connect. If you have not enabled Connect, but you have registered for a Stripe account, it's really easy. All you need to do is go to the left-hand side of your Stripe dashboard. I have Connect here because I've already used it. It may not be there if you haven't, so you'll have to click on More, find Connect, and simply activate it. There is some onboarding flow to go through, but it's quite simple. Throughout this tutorial, we're going to be using the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin. This is a plugin I've developed myself. It's been live for over a year and a half now, and you can see as of the time of recording, over 350 Bubble builders have used it to build applications that integrate with Stripe Connect. I've got to see a bunch of ways that people use marketplace payments in their Bubble apps through running this plugin, and I'm going to show you everything you need to know in this tutorial from that experience. To install the plugin, you can go to the Plugins tab of your Bubble editor. Then if you click on Add Plugins and search for Stripe Connect Marketplace, you should see it appear on the right hand side. You can see here I already have it installed. You can purchase this on a one-time basis, or you can subscribe on a monthly basis. And please note that subscriptions for Bubble plugins are pro-rated. So if you install it and uninstall it after a couple of hours, you will only pay a few cents. Once you have the plugin installed, we're going to need to configure our API keys. You can see here there's a bunch of fields that are currently blank. We're going to be building out our demo application in development mode today, so it's just these three fields that we're currently concerned with. And it's really easy to get these three keys here: API key dev, Stripe publishable key dev, and Stripe secret key dev. All you need to do is go to your Stripe dashboard, click on developers, click on API keys, and for the publishable key, we're just going to copy that. We're going to go back to our plugin tab, and we're going to paste that in there. That's our publishable key done. For our Stripe secret key, very similar. We're going to reveal our secret key. You may have to enter a password just for security reasons. We're going to copy our secret key, go back to our plugins tab, paste it in there, and then finally for the API key dev, very simple. All we need to do is click on the box, type in the word bearer, put in a space, and then paste in the secret key again. Okay, so now that we've done that, our plugin is hooked up to Stripe and we can start building out some workflows. You'll see here that I've built out a basic sign-up page. And what we're building today for our demo example is an e-commerce style app, much like Etsy or Depop or Amazon. I've called it Meepop, as you can see here. And it's going to be an e-commerce style marketplace where merchants or sellers can sign up, sell goods on your platform, and then your platform will get a percentage of each transaction that takes place. You can see that on the sign up form, in addition to the standard email address and password inputs, I've also created this one called shop name. That's because each of the merchant who is signing up for your platform, they're going to have their own shop and they're going to be able to name it something specific to them. So what I'm going to do before I build out the workflows associated with this sign up is I'm going to go to my database and I'm going to create a new data type and I'm going to call it store. We'll create that and we'll create a new field on that store data type and call it name. This is just going to be the name of the store that has been created. So let's do that now. If we go back to our design tab, click on the create account button and click on edit workflow. We obviously want to sign the user up. So we're going to go to account, sign the user up. The email is going to be the input emails value. The password is going to be the input passwords value. And then we're also going to create a new thing. The new thing we're creating is a new store. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the name of that store to be equal to input name, its value. Now, we do want to link this store to the user so that whenever this user is signing up with their email address and password, we're also going to link the specific shop to them. So what I think is the best thing to do is if we go back to our database again and click on user, if we create a new field on the user data type called store and make it the field type store, then when we're going to sign up a user, we can actually link this store that's created to this user that has been signed up. And what we can do is we can make changes to the current user. We can say store is equal to the result of step 2, the store we created there, and then that should link it to that user. Finally, we're going to navigate the user to a dashboard page, and I've created a very bare bones dashboard page at the moment. You can see there's not really much here apart from the header, but we are going to build that out in a second. So let's go back to our merchant sign up and go to our workflow, creating the account, signing the user up, creating a new store, adding the store to the user, and then we're going to send them to the dashboard page. So let's sign the user up just to test all that out. We'll refresh our page. We're going to give this shop name as the Cranford Tech Shop. Email address is going to be shop@cranfordtech.com, and then the password we'll put in as well. So let's create that account. And you can see we're being navigated to this dashboard page. And you might remember from our checklist earlier that the first thing we want to do is onboard our merchants. And what that means is that if a merchant or a seller wants to sell goods or services on your platform, they need to have their own Stripe account. The specific type of account we're going to allow merchants to create on our platform is known as a Stripe Express account. It's a type of Stripe account that Stripe does recommend for marketplaces like this. So we need to find a way to allow our users to register for those Stripe Express accounts. We want our merchants to be able to sign up for a Stripe Express account and then fill out all the necessary Stripe requirements. Stripe have a bunch of information they need you to fill out before they'll register you for an account. And we're going to do that on a Stripe onboarding portal. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a button in our visual elements. We're going to drop it on our page and we're going to say register for Stripe account. And we're just going to fit that with the content. And we're going to add a bunch of workflow actions to this button. But before we do, we need to think about our database structure because we're going to be recording some information based on the user or the merchant signing up for a Stripe Express account. And what we're going to want to do is store down a couple of pieces of information. The first one is the unique Stripe ID that's associated with their Stripe Express account. So what I'm going to do is call this field seller account ID. And I'm going to make it a text field. I'm also going to add a field called charges enabled. I'm going to come back to this in a bit, but what we're going to use this for is to figure out whether or not the user has supplied all the information necessary or whether there's still some outstanding information that they need to give to Stripe. I'm going to set the default of charges enabled to be no. Let's go back to our workflow that we're going to build out for this button. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to the plugins tab here. You can see because we have the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin installed, we have a bunch of workflow actions here that we can access. And the very first one we want to use is the Stripe Connect Create Express Account action. Okay, so this action is going to actually create a Stripe Express account. It's not going to be fully registered in the sense that the user is still going to need to supply information later, but it kicks off that process. And there's a bunch of fields here that we need to fill out. The very first one is the country that the user's business is registered in. So if I'm a seller on this MePop platform and I'm based in the US, I'm going to leave my country ID there as the US. But my platform, which I'm going to be using throughout this tutorial, is called Qualified. It's an old Stripe account I had for a previous business. And I'm going to make things simple at first, say that my seller business is also registered in Ireland. The 2-digit code for Ireland is IE. There's a full list of country codes down here that you can use, and we'll leave it like that. For email, I'm going to use the current user's email address just to keep things simple. So current user's email, and then payout interval. This is really interesting. So this is on what frequency your merchant is going to get paid out. Say they make a bunch of sales in the first week of the month, but you don't want them to get paid out until month end. If that were the case, you'd leave the payout interval to monthly. And then you'd also set the monthly anchor here, which is the specific date in the month on which the user will get paid out, only if you set this to monthly. So if I set it to 1, the user is going to get paid out from the platform on the first day of every month, whereas if I set it to 30, it'll be the 30th day of every single month. You can also set the payout interval to daily if you wanted your merchants to get paid out on a daily basis, or weekly if you wanted to get paid out every week. I'm going to leave it as monthly, and I'm going to leave the monthly anchor as 30 for now. So this workflow action is creating a Stripe Express account. We then want to take information from this and save it to our database. So what we're going to do is we're going to make changes to the current user, and we're going to fill out that seller account ID field that we created, and it's going to equal the result of step 1. It's Stripe account ID. So that means that we're creating the Express account in step 1, and then we're saving it down to our database. Now we want the user to be able to access the Stripe onboarding portal. So again, we're going to use a custom workflow action that comes with the plugin, and we're going to be using this Stripe Connect create onboarding link action next. And again, there's 3 fields here that we need to fill out. The first one is the Stripe account ID of the connected account you're onboarding. So because this whole platform is going to be built on Stripe Connect, you may hear me refer to connected accounts. That's essentially merchant accounts that are on our platform. An account is the unique Stripe account ID that's associated with the connected account, which is the merchant's Stripe Express account. And what we can do for that, it's really simple. We can just say the result of step 1, it's Stripe account ID. So again, we're creating that Express account, associating that unique ID with the user, and then passing that through to the account field here. Refresh URL and return URL are essentially the web pages you return to if you exit the onboarding flow. Let's go to return URL first, because hopefully it's the one that'll be most applicable to you. Return URL, so the user will be redirected to after leaving or completing the onboarding flow. What I'm going to do for this is I'm going to insert dynamic data. I'm simply going to say this URL, which will send us back to the dashboard page. So again, if you think about it, we're on the dashboard page. We're going to have a button here now. If we refresh our page, we're going to register the user for a Stripe Express account. They'll be sent off to Stripe onboarding portal. And then once they've finished, I want to send them back to this dashboard page. Refresh URL. This is the URL the user is going to be redirected to if the account link is expired or it just doesn't use for some reason. Again, I'm going to keep things simple and just leave it as this URL. And then the final step in this onboarding flow is we're actually going to send the user to the Stripe onboarding portal. So again, we can go to navigation, open an external website, and we're going to want to go to result of step 3. It's URL. You can see that's coming there automatically. So let's test this out. Refresh our page. And let's register for a Stripe account. And you can see here, we've been sent through to this connect.stripe.com URL. This is the Stripe onboarding portal. You'll also see here that my application's branding is showing up. This is qualified. Again, like I said, a previous Stripe account I've used, and its custom color scheme. I'm not going to spend too much time going through the intricacies of the Stripe onboarding portal because this is going to be different depending on what geographic region you're in. Because I registered for an Irish account, the requirements that are going to be shown on screen here are going to be different to what's going to be shown if you're in Australia or Canada or the US. So I'm just going to fast forward to the very end of filling out this information. Okay, so I provided all the information Stripe has asked for, things like my website, address. This is all just dummy details. Some banking details. So I provided test bank account details just for the demonstration purposes here today, but you can obviously add your actual banking details. So I'm going to click on agree and submit. And what we should see now is I'm going to be sent back to my dashboard page, and you can see that is indeed what's happened. And if we go to our Stripe dashboard, and if we click on connect, and we look on connected accounts, you'll see here the one I've registered, shop@cranfordtech.com. it's been improved. You can see here, charges have been enabled on it. I do eventually need to supply an identity document, but for now it's okay. So this merchant is good to sell. But one thing is that I provided all the necessary information, payments are enabled, but not every merchant is going to do that first time, I can tell you from experience. So what we need to do is we need to check if I have actually successfully registered for a Stripe account or whether there's still some outstanding information that I need to give. And the way we can do that is we can use this charges enable field that I've added here. Remember, the default is set to no. And what we can do is when the page loads, we can make changes to the current user. And what we can do is we can say charges enabled equals, and then we're going to use this get data from an external API workflow action. The API provider is, again, we're going to see a bunch of different calls that we have because we have the plugin installed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to retrieve account details. The account ID is going to be the current user's seller account ID. And you can see here we have a bunch of information we can get back. There's so many things that you can get information back from Stripe for. The only one that we're concerned with right now is this charges enabled field. So just having a quick look at our database, you can see at the moment my one user's charges enabled are actually set to blank. They probably should be set to no, but I think I signed the user up before I set the defaults to no. I'm just going to manually change that now. But then if we refresh our dashboard page, we should see that workflow run in the background. And if we go to our database and refresh, you can see charges enabled have now gone to yes. We probably want to demonstrate this on the dashboard itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a text element, just drop it in here, and I'm going to say charges, Stripe charges enabled. And then we put in the current users charges enabled, and that'll default to a no if we haven't, but if we have, that workflow will run and change it to yes. Let's just tidy this up. And refresh our page. Okay, we probably don't want the register for Stripe account button there if they've already successfully registered for one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say is when current users charges enabled is yes, this element is visible, untick that, and that should remove it from the page for this particular user. Okay, this is a good start, but like I said, we want to check if a user hasn't successfully provided all of the information. So let's sign up another user, and this time just kind of not provide the correct information to Stripe or something along those lines. I'm going to log out. We're going to be brought back to the index page, which is currently blank. Let's go back to merchant sign up. And let's just call this one the Cranford Bookshop. Books at cranfordtech.com. And again, a simple password. And let's create that account. And you can see here we're getting an error. If you look at the bottom right, we're seeing this little warning. And what are we saying? Okay, we're seeing that the Stripe Connect retrieve account details just returns an error and an unauthorized request URL accounts. Now, what's actually happened here is, if you think about it, when we're running that workflow on the dashboard page, we require a Stripe account ID, but this user hasn't actually registered for a Stripe account yet. So therefore, we're going to get an error if we run this workflow when they haven't registered for that account. So what we're going to do is we're only going to run this workflow when current user's seller account ID is not empty. So only when there's something there. So let's refresh our page, and we shouldn't see the error this time because I don't expect that workflow to run, and it hasn't. So that's a good start. And this time, when we're registering for a Stripe account, let's click on that button. we're once again brought to the Stripe onboarding portal, but instead of filling out the information, let's just click on the return to qualify button. So let's say the merchant doesn't fill out the necessary information. Our charges enabled have stayed at no, which is good because again, they have not supplied enough information. And if we go to our connect it accounts and we refresh that, what we should see is that we've an account under books@cranfordtech.com that's restricted. And you can see that is indeed the case because they haven't supplied enough information. Charges and payouts were paused. If you click on requirements, you can see that they haven't supplied any of this information. Now, if they do want to go back into the onboarding flow, it's really simple. All you need to do is, again, use a similar workflow to what we have. We don't want to create an account again. So what we probably should do is just create another button. So we want to copy this one, going to paste it down, and we're going to say this is going to be complete Stripe registration. And this is only going to be visible when we remove that condition. This is only going to be visible when the current user's seller account ID is not empty. So they do have an account, but charges enabled is set to no. That's the only time this is going to be visible. So we'll put that there, and I will say this is not going to be visible on page load. And if we refresh, we should see that that button will pop up for this user because that is indeed what their scenario is. And we don't really need this. So what we can say is this is going to be not visible when the current user's charges enabled is yes, or when the current user's seller account ID is not empty. So if they do have some sort of account, and again, let's refresh, and we should only see the one button now, which should be complete Stripe registration. And it's really simple. All we need to do is go to this button, go to add workflow, go back down to our plugins, and go to create onboarding link. The Stripe account ID this time around is going to be equal to the current user's seller account ID. We'll set the refresh URL to be equal to this URL again. I'm going to add something on the end of the return URL. What I'm going to say is this URL. I'm also going to put a parameter at the end of it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put in question mark, and then I'm going to say return equals true. And I'll show you why I'm going to do that in a minute. But for now, let's just bring the user back to the onboarding portal. So we can go to result of step one, its URL, it's popping in there automatically, and refresh our page. And let's complete the Stripe registration. And again, you can see we're brought back here. And maybe just for demonstration purposes, let me fill out some of this information. So we'll use this. And we'll continue. And I'm going to fill in some of this info here. So I filled out all the personal details, but what I'm going to do is I'm not going to fill out the business details for now. And then if I go back to my dashboard, you'll see return equals true was in the parameter there for a second. We'll come back to that. But if we go to this and we refresh, you can see here there is still some information requested. I think we fill out one or two of these, but again, let's go back into the onboarding portal. Before I do, I wanted to figure out that issue with the return equals true actually, because you can see here that didn't show up. So I think what we need to do is put in just that at the end of it. Refresh our page. Complete Stripe registration. And we can continue. Use the test mode. And what you can see here is we don't need to fill out all the information again. We've already filled out some of it. So Stripe is smart enough to know which information we've given it and what information is outstanding. Let's use a test account there. And then we can agree and submit. And you can see this time we do have the return equals true in the page URL. But before coming on to that, what we can do is just take a look and refresh our connected account. But you can see now that payouts have been enabled on this particular account. Now, you will see at some stage we're going to need to provide some identity documents, which means that I would recommend keeping this onboarding flow as it is at the moment, where, if charges enabled comes up as no, they're going to have the option to go back to the portal. So just to note that. Now, the reason I put this return equals true parameter in the page URL is I want to signal to the merchant more obviously that yes, you have registered for a Stripe Express account. So what you could do, and you don't have to do this, but I think it's a nice touch, is you could add a pop-up element. So if we search here for our pop-up and we put this in here, what we could do is we could put something in like a text element, just drop that in there and say, you've successfully registered for a Stripe Express account. We'll just make that heading a bit, and we'll just make that font a bit nicer. Change the layout to a column. Put it in the center and apply some padding. Maybe just change the width of the height of that to be a bit smaller. Put it as heading 6. Okay, and then what we want to do is we only want to show this pop-up when 2 conditions are met. We want to show this pop-up, number 1, when they have registered for a Stripe Express account, and number 2, only when this return equals true is in the page URL, because what you could do is you could show it on every page load when the user has their charges enabled, but we don't want to show this every single time a user logs onto their dashboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to say when page is loaded, but only when current users charges enabled or yes, that's condition 1, and then also when get data from page URL, we're going to type in return here, and we're going to say only when that is, or only when that is true. So because return equals true is in the page URL at the moment, if we refresh, we should see that pop up. Well, it won't because we haven't actually triggered the pop-up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go show an element. And we're going to show the element pop-up A. And you can see there that does actually show up. Whereas if this return equals true wasn't in the page URL, then the pop-up is not going to show up. So we've now gone through how to onboard merchants to your marketplace app. Before we move on to processing marketplace payments, which is the next part in our ultimate guide, I do want to talk a bit about debugging, because this is likely going to be something you'll come across at some stage as you're building your marketplace app. And every now and then you're either not going to submit the right information to Stripe, the formatting will be off, or something may go wrong. This is very easy to resolve. Stripe are very generous in terms of explaining what goes wrong and what you need to do to fix it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out. I'm going to create another user and we're going to register for a Stripe Express account. But this time I'm going to send the incorrect information. So let's just do another dummy store name. So we'll create that account and we'll be brought to our dashboard. But this time, when we're initially registering for a Stripe account, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the email field here blank. And Stripe also needs an email in order for it to create an Express account for us. So I'm expecting to see an error here. And you see, I'm getting this alert that says, plugin action, Stripe Connect create onboarding link, error when parsing the response. The key error is not part of the B-type definition. Now, I know that I haven't given the email address to Stripe and that's what's causing the error, but sometimes you're going to see something like this, and this isn't a particularly helpful response. It's pretty generic, and it doesn't really tell us the source of the issue. But thankfully, if you go to your Stripe dashboard and you click on developers and you go to logs, what you'll see here is we do have a list of all the actions that Stripe has done on our accounts over the past today, first of all, and going back even further. And what's really useful is it gives us an error code over here on the right hand side. So you can see here there is an error with this particular workflow, and you can see here it was caused because we pass an empty string for account. And if we scroll down, we'll see here account was indeed empty. Now, this is a bit confusing because we didn't actually even get to that stage. If we think about our workflow, before we even create the onboarding link, we're creating the account. And the reason that Stripe is telling me that this account was empty is because it was never created in the first place. And we know that because we look at the error prior to it. You'll see here we have email invalid email address, and you can see your email was empty, which was indeed what we did. So if you do come across an error like this for any particular workflow that you're using the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin for, this is the best way to figure out the issue straight away. We're now going to move on to processing marketplace payments. And you can see here the first thing we're going to do is just go through the mechanics of splitting a one-off payment between a merchant and a platform. Going back to our dashboard page, you might notice I made a couple of changes here. The first thing is there's added name of the seller's store to the top of the page, but I've also added, more importantly, this My Product section. And what this is going to be is this is going to be the area where the store owner, in this case the owner of the Cranford Tech shop, uploads products that they want to sell on the Meepop platform. You can see here that I've already added 2 products, and I'm just going to add one more to show you how it works. So we'll click on add new product, and we'll call this new product cardigan. We're going to get a price of 50 euros is going to be the currency, or $50 I should say, for this store. And then we're going to upload an image, and we'll click add product, and you can see now it's appearing under the My Product section. And just to give a quick look at our database, what I've done is I've created this new data type called product. I've given it the fields image, which is an image, name, the name of it, price, which is the price of it, and then finally the store it is linked to. So if we take a look at the cardigan I've just uploaded, you can see it's linked to this store, which is in fact the Cranford Tech store, which you can see here. Now, if we go back to our homepage, I've also updated this just to show that all the products that are for sale on the Meepop platform, at the moment, these 3 are from the one seller, the Cranford Tech shop. But if you had other sellers as well on the platform, they would also be adding their own products. And if we click on one of the products, let's go with the classic blue jumper, we're brought to this product page. It's quite a simple workflow that's involved with that. When one of the products is clicked on, we're simply going to page product, sending the current sales product as the data. And if we look at the product page, you'll see it's quite basic. It's just the current page's product's name, the current page's product store name, and then the image, the description, and some placeholder text that I put in there as well. But what we want to build out now is a payment flow associated with this buy button. So when a customer clicks on this buy button, we want them to be able to input their card details and purchase this product. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out as the store owner. And then if we go back to a customer sign up page, very similar to the merchant sign up page. So let's just sign this customer up. And create an account for them. Brought back to the home page, and quickly just looking at our database, what we could do is we could probably distinguish between customers and sellers and give them different user roles. We don't need to do that now, but just something you may wish to do on the sign up flows, add in an extra action that essentially makes the user here a customer, and equivalent on the merchant sign up page, make them a merchant. Okay, now we are logged in as a customer. And what I'm going to do also is I'm going to get rid of this My Shop button up there because we don't want to show that to a customer really. So what I'm going to say is when the user is logged out, it's not visible, or when the current user's seller account ID is empty. So any user that doesn't have a seller account ID, not going to be showing that, therefore the customers won't. Let's click on our classic blue jumper again. And we want to buy this jumper Before we click buy, we want to structure our database so that we can record information relating to this transaction. So I'm going to go back to my data tab. I'm going to click on data types and I'm going to have the new type called transaction. And there are a number of fields here that we want to add. We're only going to add 3 for now. We will add further as we get deeper into the tutorial and get into more kind of complex flows. But for now, all we need is amount, which is going to be the total value of the transaction. It's going to be a number. Checkout session ID. This is going to be a unique Stripe identifier, which I'll explain in more detail in a minute. And then finally, seller account ID. This is really important because this is the Stripe account ID that is linked to the seller of the good that we are purchasing. Okay, now let's go back to our product page and build out the workflow associated with this buy button here. The very first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a new thing. The new thing we're going to create is a transaction, and we're not going to change any fields in it just yet. We will in a minute, but let's leave it blank for now. The second thing we're going to do is we are going to create a checkout session. So you can see here under Stripe Connect, we have Stripe Connect create checkout session, and we also have Stripe Connect create checkout session subscription. That is not what we're going to be using now. We may get onto this later in the tutorial. That is really geared towards subscription payments. For now, we're going to stick with Stripe Connect create checkout session. There is a bunch of fields here we need to fill out. It looks like quite a lot, but it's quite simple once you get into it. The first thing we need to fill out is the success URL. So this is the URL the customer is sent to when the payment is complete. You may wish to redirect them to, congrats on purchasing this good page, but for now, I'm going to keep it very simple, and I'm just going to put in website home URL, essentially sending them back to the home page. We also need to put in a URL the customer will be directed to if they cancel the payment during the payment flow. And again, I'm going to keep it really simple for now and just put in website home URL. Stripe account ID. This is the unique Stripe account ID of the seller of the good or service. And in this case, we obviously want to get the Stripe account ID associated with the shop at cranfordtech.com account. So we want to get this value here. And what we can do for that is if we go back to the workflow, what we can say is we can go for the current pages product, stores, creators, seller account ID. So a couple of layers there, but what we're essentially doing is we're getting the store, we're getting whoever created that store, which is our seller, and then getting their Stripe account ID. Platform fee, and you'll see in bracket here it says cents. This is really important. So I'm actually going to fill out the price cents field first and then come back to this. The price in cents is the price of the good or service that is being sold, and that's going to be equal to the current page's product price. Quite simple. So again, in this example, if we're purchasing that kind of blue jumper, you'll see here in our database, we have for products, classic blue jumper, price is 50. But as the information highlights, you do need to put this in cents. So at the moment, 50 is supposed to represent $50. What we need to do is we need to multiply this by 100 to get to our cents value. And then we want to decide how much the platform, which is going to be your bubble app, how much that's going to take from each transaction. So I'm going to copy this expression here. I'm going to paste it in here, and we're essentially going to get to our $50 again. We obviously don't want the platform taking the full amount of the transaction. I'm going to let them take 20%. So I'm going to click on more here, and I'm going to multiply it by 0.2, and that will allow the platform, which is MePop in this example, to get 20% of that $50 transaction, which is $10. Currency is in US dollar by default. You will notice that you will have to use a 3-digit ISO code. You can see a full list of currencies supported by Stripe at that link. So if you're unsure as to whether the currency you wish to use is supported, please do check that out. I'm going to leave that as USD for now. And then product name is going to be equal to the current page's product name. There's a few other fields here. So there's on behalf of, there is delayed payment fields, there's embedded checkout session. I'm going to come on to these later. I want to just get us up and running with a simple marketplace transaction for now. Now, you might remember in step 1, we created a new transaction, but we didn't actually record any information against it. We're going to change that now. What we're going to do is we are going to make changes to a thing. The thing we're changing is the transaction that we created in step 1, and we're adding a bunch of information to that entry. The first thing is the amount, and you could do this in 2 ways. You could really take the value that I've added in here, the price in cents, or what you can do is you can do result of step 2, the amount of that. I think that's quite a simple way of doing it, so that's what I'm going to go for. Seller account ID, that's going to be equal to current pages, products, stores, creators, seller account ID, again, much like we did in step 2. And then finally, checkout session ID. This is really important because we're going to use this to retrieve further information down the line. For now, all you need to know is it's going to be the result of step 2, it's checkout session ID. Just to expand on checkout sessions for a second. So the entire plugin is built on the Stripe checkout product. This is essentially a way that Stripe allows you to create dynamic payment forms where people can pay for goods using their credit card or other payment methods. You'll see it in action in a second. And in fact, we're almost there. The next step and the final step in this basic marketplace transaction flow is to navigate, open an external website. We're going to insert dynamic data, and we're going to go to the URL that's created in step 2. So let's refresh our page. Let's click the buy button and see if it works out. Okay, and you can see here we're getting an error. So let's do our debugging, much like we did earlier on. Let's go back to our logs. So again, just for memory's sake, developers, logs, and if we refresh, our dashboard, you'll see sometimes the errors don't actually show up, which is kind of annoying. What you can do instead is just go to failed. Sometimes it shows up there. Let's just give it a second. And you can see it did indeed show up there. Okay, so what's it telling us? It's telling us we did not specify a destination account, and the destination account is essentially this value inside here. So what I suspect is happening here is this is due to privacy rules. Sometimes they can interfere with you getting the data incorrectly. So let me just try this in a simpler way. So rather than saying that, let's go with current pages, products, creators, seller account ID. And then let's just take a quick look at our privacy rules to make sure we can actually get that data. So that is publicly visible, privacy rules. And we may need to tick this. Let's just try that out. Refresh our page. And we'll click the buy button again. And yeah, you can see this time we are being brought to the Stripe checkout. You can see here the URL is checkout.stripe.com. I am later going to show you how you can embed this payment form in your own website. But for now, let's just stick with this. So we have the options to fill in our details here. I'm going to fill this data in very quickly. Okay, so I filled that information. Just for your own knowledge, you can see here I've used a credit card number that's a bunch of 42s. That is the Stripe test card. If you Google Stripe test card, it'll give you a bunch of different card details you can use to simulate various different scenarios, but that's what that is there. But let's click pay for this. I'm expecting to be brought back to my homepage because that's what we specified as the return URL. And you can see that is indeed what happened. Let's take a look at our Stripe dashboard and see if that payment went through. Okay, that looks like it's been successful. You can see there's been a payment for $50. You can see the customer was customer@testmail.com. Those are the details I put in. You can see here Stripe have taken a fee from it. And they've also done the translation. Because this was a euro count, they've translated the $50 that were spent by the customer into my net euro take. Now, what's really important is if we go back to payments, that was how much was spent in total. Let's take a look at collected fees. Yeah, and you can see here $10 have gone to the platform, which is qualified in this scenario, or kind of MePop is the overall platform, I suppose. So $10 have gone to the platform, and then if we look at Connect, and if we look at shop at cranfordtech.com, you'll see here they have a total balance of 35 euros. So what that is essentially is, I'm not sure if we can look at the actual sales here. If we look at payments maybe. Yeah, so you can see here that this is how much they got out of that. 44.65 gross, but then after the fee that went to the platform, they got 35 euros net out of all of that. So look, that's how you do a very basic marketplace transaction. Let's go back to our database and just take a look at the transaction that was recorded there. You can see here we have the amounts, we have the seller account ID, and we have the checkout session ID in there as well. I do want to go back to the create checkout session action here and just go over a couple of the more advanced fields, particularly this on behalf of field, because this is quite important. This will decide whether the customer is interacting with the platform, which in this case is Meepop, or whether interacting with the merchant on the platform, which would be the Cranford Tech store in this case. So if we just go back and we want to buy this one more time, let's click buy. You'll see at the moment, the branding here is qualified. There's no mention of the Cranford Tech store. We are really interacting with the qualified platform, or Meepop as it should be really. But if we change this to yes, and we refresh our page, and we click on that again, and click on buy this time we should see information relating to Cranford Tech show up. Yeah, you can see there, rather than the qualified information, we have Cranford Tech showing up. And if we look in further detail at this explanation here, you'll see that if this is set to no, like now, you will not be able to do transactions if the platform and the connected account are registered in different payment zones. So for example, I'm on an Irish platform at the moment, which is Meepop. It's registered as an Irish platform. Cranford Tech is an Irish entity as well. It's the merchant on Meepop. Because they're both in Ireland, absolutely fine. No issues if we set this to no. But if they were in different regions, so for example, Cranford Tech Store was a US-based entity and registered on an Irish platform, this would be an issue. You would not be able to use no. So a lot of people will set this as yes by default, just because a lot of marketplace apps, they're going to be global in nature. If your merchants are primarily going to be based in the same region as your platform, then you can set that to no, but a lot of people will set that to yes by default. You can read more about it at this particular link down here as well. Now, at the moment, when we're processing these payments, the payment form that's created by the checkout session, it's on this checkout.stripe.com webpage, which is fine, but a lot of people will actually want to host it on their own URL. So let's say we wanted to host it on this Stripe Connect 2024 Bubble Apps URL. You can do that. That is possible. It's actually a relatively new feature that has been added to the plugin because Stripe only allowed it relatively recently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new page. I'm going to call this checkout. And I'm actually going to clone it from the product page. Actually, we'll clone it from the index page. Might be easier. And I'm going to delete this group here. So we have a pretty blank page. But what you'll see is we have this element that comes with the plugin, and it's called Embedded Checkout Session. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to drop this on the page that you want to host the payment form on. And I recommend letting it take up pretty much the full width of the page and giving it a height of at least 700 as well, just so it has room to breathe and we can fully see the payment form. And then what we're going to do is when we're creating the checkout session on the product page, which is here, we're going to change two things. I'm going to set this back to no just for a minute to keep it kind of consistent. But what we're going to change is we're going to change this embedded session to yes, and then we're going to specify a return URL. Now, return URL is quite similar to a success URL in that it's going to be where the user is redirected to after they've completed the checkout session or, purchased the good, in other words. So I'm going to take actually the same one that we have up here. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it into here. Now, because we have the return URL, we don't actually need a success and cancel URL, so you can clear these if you want to. I will just to show you, but you can also leave them in. And then the other change we're going to make is instead of opening an external website, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to a page, and that page is going to be the checkout page. Okay, so let's go back and buy a Christmas jumper this time. It's not going to work this time, but I'm just going to show you what's going to happen first of all. And then we'll fix the one remaining thing we need to for this to be embedded on our page. So let's click buy. We're brought to the checkout page and there's absolutely nothing there. So again, not really what we want, but we did drop that element in. So we can get something to show up. We just need to do one final step. And in order to show the payment form using the embedded checkout session element, what we need to do is we need to run a workflow on page load. And we're going to say when the page is loaded, we're going to go down to element actions and we're going to say load an embedded checkout session. And we just need to fill out one value here. And the value is the client secret value. And this is quite a sensitive piece of information from a security perspective. So I really recommend loading it directly in here rather than saving it down to your database or saving it somewhere else. And the way you can get it directly is what you're going to need to do is we're going to use the get data from an external API. We're going to use Stripe Connect, retrieve checkout session details. And then you can see if we click on more, then we can actually access the client secret here. But our issue is we need to provide the checkout session ID. Now we have saved that down to our database for a lot of our transactions. You can see there, but we need somehow to get it from this page here into this workflow here. And the way I suggest doing that is if we go back to our product page and that workflow associated with the buy button, when we are going to the page checkout, what we can do is we can send a transaction. And we can send the transaction that was created in step 1. And you can see here we are getting an error. And the error is occurring because we do not have transaction set as the data type on our checkout page. So let's do that. If we go back, page checkout, we can set the type of content here to be transaction. Our error goes away. And now, if we take a look at that workflow again on the product page, we're going to the page checkout and we're sending the transaction we've created here. We know that we're saving down a checkout session ID to that transaction. So what we can do quite easily on the checkout page is here we can say current pages transactions checkout session ID. So I'm going to go back to the home page again, just so we can sort of flow from start to finish. And let's go to cardigan this time. Let's buy that. You can see we've been brought to the checkout and our payment form is loading up in our own page here. So this is how you can embed the payment forms in your own Bubble application, which some people prefer from a UX point of view. So let's just fill out these details really quickly. And let's click pay. And we should be brought this time to the return URL. And you can see again, this is the home page, it's the same as a success URL. And if we take a look at our database, and we take a look at that transaction, we can see there that we've saved down the information associated with that. So we've gone through how to create a basic marketplace transaction, but one thing we haven't accounted for is what if a transaction doesn't go through? So if we have a user who, let's say, purchases a cardigan from one of our merchants, and they click on the buy button, but they then decide that they don't wish to actually go through with the purchase, and instead maybe they click on the home button. Well, we don't have a way of distinguishing this in our database at the moment. You'll see if we go into all transactions, they all look the same at the moment. There's no field to indicate whether or not a payment did actually go through. So we're going to solve that problem now. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull down the payment status on the return URL, the success URL, or the cancel URL page. You might remember if we go back to our product page and click on the flow associated with the buy button, that if we're embedding a checkout session, we have this return URL here. I'm just going to clear that for a second and put back in website home URL. And then if we are navigating to a Stripe hosted page, we have a success URL and a cancel URL. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bit of information to the return URL. I'm going to use a page URL parameter to do this. So I'm going to put in question mark, and then I'm going to type in transaction. equals insert dynamic data and the result of step 1, its unique ID. So you might remember we created a transaction in step 1. No information was actually set to it here, but a unique ID was created because we created a new transaction. I'm taking that unique ID and I'm adding it to the end of the return URL. This means that when a user purchases something now, which we will demonstrate, let's go with the Christmas jumper, we'll buy that, and I'll fill in these details really quickly. We should now see when we click pay that we're redirected to the home page, but that we will have that transaction in the page URL. And we can use this piece of information here to update the payment status of the transaction. Before we build out the workflow associated with that, I'm going to go back to my database. I'm going to go to data types, and I'm going to add a new field to the transaction data type called payment status. It's going to be a text field. And then if we go back to our index page, we're going to run something on the page load. So we're going to say when page is loaded, but only when get data from page URL, transaction is not empty. So we're only going to run this workflow when transaction is in the page URL and when that is not empty. And what we're going to do is we are going to make changes to a thing. We're going to do a search for a transaction. And for now, we're just going to pick the very first item. And what we're going to do is we're going to say payment status is equal to get data from an external API. And we can use the Stripe retrieve checkout session details call that comes with the plugin. And we need to insert this transaction's checkout session ID. And then we have a bunch of information we can choose from here. You'll see there's a long list of information we can get back from Stripe. The one I want to get back is payment status. We're nearly ready to go on this, but you might have noticed that we're not really searching for a specific transaction. Yes, we're getting the first one, but the first transaction doesn't necessarily have to be the one that we just created. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this unique ID up here to identify the correct transaction that we want to update. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new constraint, and I'm going to say unique ID is equal to get data from page URL, parameter name equals transaction. So what's going to happen now is Bubble is going to take this unique ID, it's going to cross-reference it versus all of the unique IDs for transactions in our database, and it's going to look up the one that equals this one. Let's take a look at our database one last time, and then we'll refresh our page. So you can see here the most recent transaction does not currently have a payment status, but if we refresh our page and go back to our database and click refresh data, you'll see there's still nothing going through there. So let's take a look at our workflow, and I can see I've actually spelled transaction wrong, and that's why that's happening. So my mistake there. Let's go back to the product page where we initially specified that and correct my typo. So transaction, that's the one. And we can buy one more product, buy that. Fill this out quickly. Okay, let's pay for this Christmas jumper. We should be brought back to the home page. We should see a unique ID associated with our transaction in the page URL. And if we go to our database, I'm hoping that we have a new transaction, and I can see there the payment status equals to paid. So that's how you track whether or not a transaction was paid for. So we've gone through some of the mechanics of processing marketplace payments, and the next thing we want to look at is how to process refunds. Now, either the merchant, which in this case would be the owner of the Cranver Tech Shop, or the administrator of the platform, so whoever runs the Meepop platform in this example, either of those users could have the ability to issue refunds. In this example here, I'm going to assume that you want the merchant to have the ability to issue refunds. And if we scroll down here, you'll see I've added a new section to the merchant dashboard, which is called My Transactions. And this is essentially all of the transactions that this merchant has been involved in. So if we look at the editor and just take a look at what's actually happening here underneath the hood, you'll see that this is a table element. What I'm doing here is I'm searching for transactions, and I'm looking for all transactions where the seller account ID is equal to the current user's seller account ID. So again, just using that to filter for transactions that are relevant for this particular merchant. You'll see here under status, I'm pulling in the current row transactions payment status. That's the field that we created in the previous section of this tutorial. It's not looking great from a UI perspective at the moment because we have a bunch of these transactions where either we didn't track the status initially, or we did track the status but it wasn't paid for, and so it was left blank. So what I'm going to suggest you do is you only look at transactions that were definitely paid for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, add a constraint. We only want the transactions where the payment status is equal to paid. And then if we refresh our page, we should only see this solitary transaction showing up here. Next, we're going to want to create a workflow on this refund link that will refund the transaction. Now, before we do that, I do want to go back to our database and add another field to our transaction data type and call this refund status. It's going to be a text field. And we're going to set the default here to be NA, because by default, payments should not be refunded. Just so I can see what that looks like for our most recent transaction here. And I might tidy this up and just delete all of the ones that we didn't track properly because they were at an earlier stage in the tutorial. Delete all them. I'm also going to add that default NA just to this specific refund there. Okay, then we're going to add in another column on our table here. We're going to call this refund status. And let's get rid of that. And then we'll copy this and we'll say current rows transactions refund status. And let's refresh our dashboard. We should see an NA next to that particular one. Yep, and that's what that is. And then what we're going to do is once this button here is clicked, we're going to go to Plugins, Stripe Connect, Create a Refund. And there are a number of fields that we need to fill out here. There's a payment intent ID, there's the amount we want to refund, we want to figure out whether we're refunding the platform fee, and then the charge type. But let's start off with the payment intent ID. To get this field, what we can do is we can go to Get Data from an External API. We can go to Retrieve Checkout Session Details. And we can say Checkout Session is equal to this current rows transactions checkout session ID. And we want to get the payment intent. That will give us that. For the amount, I'm going to assume here that you want to refund the full amount. You can only refund up to the full amount of the transaction. I will also say you're not going to get the Stripe fees back. They do not get refunded as part of the refund. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to go for current rows transactions amount. You can choose whether or not you want to refund the platform fee, which would be the amount that went to the Meepop in this example or whatever bubble application you're building. I'm going to leave this as yes. And then importantly, you need to specify whether the original charge was a destination charge or whether it was a separate charge and transfer. We actually haven't discussed these two types of charges yet. Everything we've done so far has been a destination charge, and this is relevant mostly for the kind of delayed payments that we're going to come on to in a later section of the tutorial. So I'm going to leave this as destination for now, just for reference in case you're curious. You can't figure out what kind of charge you initially used by looking at the create checkout session workflow. And you'll see down here we have charge type, which can be either destination or a separate charge and transfer. But let's go back to our dashboard for a second. So we're going to create a refund, and let's just do this step for now. We can build out the rest of this workflow in a second, but let's refresh our dashboard. Let's also take a look at that payment in our actual Stripe dashboard. That's the most recent one there for $40. So if we go down here and if we click on refund, something's going to happen in the background. You'll see there something has gone through. Now we need to build out the UI a bit because it's not really great at the moment. We don't know for sure whether that refund has gone through. We can check our Stripe dashboard, which I'm going to do now. And you can see there that charge has now been refunded. So once that $40 has gone through, we would ideally like to update this refund status, because at the moment this looks like any other charge. You know, it was paid for. We don't know if it was refunded or not. We still have the option to refund again, which isn't great. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a second step in here after create a refund. We're going to go to make changes to a thing. And the thing we're going to change is the current rows transaction. We're going to change the refund status of that transaction. And what we're going to say is we're going to simply get the result of step one, its status. So let's create another transaction from scratch. And the best thing to do is probably to go back to our index page and then run as the customer this time. And again, we'll purchase our Christmas jumper. Buy that. And again, I'll fast forward through putting in these payment details on the embedded payment form. And we'll click pay now. So we should see another $40 transaction go through on our Stripe dashboard. That has gone through, and hopefully we should see about $8 of that go to the platform, which has happened. You can see the previous one was refunded. And then if we go back and we run as our merchant, shop@cranfortech.com, and take a look at their shop, we'll go down here and you can see here we have this other transaction here, which was paid. Refund status is NA, but if I click on this refund button here, you can see that refund has now succeeded. So if we go back to our dashboard, take a look at that, we refresh. That transaction has now been refunded and it's accurately shown on our Stripe dashboard. So two last things to tidy this up. First of all, I'm going to get rid of this earlier transaction because it's a bit confusing given we hadn't updated accordingly at the time. So let's just delete that. And then the second thing is this refund status, this refund has been issued. It has succeeded. We should not have the opportunity to issue another refund because it already has been refunded. So what I'm going to do on our dashboard page is I'm going to say when current rows transactions refund status is succeeded, this element is not visible. And I'll collapse it as well when it's hidden. So therefore, we shouldn't have the ability to issue a refund on anything that's already been refunded. And you can see that is indeed the case there. So that's how you'd issue refunds as the merchant, and you can implement a similar system as administrator of the platform. Now, this table that I created to keep track of transactions, it's somewhat useful, but we do actually have a nicer way of letting merchants view any sales that they've made. And Stripe provides this express dashboard, which merchants can access. And the way you would create that, it's really, really simple. If you just go back up to the top of your page, let's take this button and we're going to put it in this group here. And I'm going to call this Access Stripe Dashboard. And let's add a workflow to that. What we're going to do is we're going to go down to plugins and we're going to say Stripe Connect, create express dashboard link. And all we need to do is give Stripe our account ID for the merchant. So that's going to be equal in this case to the current user's seller account ID. And then once we've created that link, all we need to do is open up an external website and reference the URL created in step 1. So let's try that out now. And you can see we're brought to this connect.com dashboard. We're in test mode and I've used a test number, so I think I can just use those digits there to access the dashboard. And you can see then we're brought in here. And even though on my dashboard it was showing I think I only had 1 transaction, in reality I had a lot more because we were doing some in this tutorial, we're deleting them. But you can see here that we have a list of all the transactions that we have received since setting up this Stripe Express account. You can see the refunds are also going through there, so it gives you nice granular detail on the various sales that the merchant has made. You can get another list from here if you go into transactions. You can export it. You can look at various different time periods. So just a nice way for your merchants to be able to see the transactions that they've been involved in. So we've now gone through what I consider the kind of standard marketplace payment flow. You'll see towards the bottom of this document, though, I do have 3 more complex marketplace payment scenarios, and we're going to go through them now. The very first scenario I want to go through is putting a payment on hold. And you can see here in brackets I have like Uber. The idea here is that, if you get in an Uber, you might authorize the payment upfront. You then get into the Uber, and once you've been successfully delivered to your destination, that charge is then captured and the funds come out of your account and into the platforms. The kind of classic scenario, I suppose, for putting a payment on hold would be if you go to a hotel. You might give your card details up front. The payment won't actually be made at that point in time. But once you're checking out a few days later, then the hotel takes the funds from your account. And then a third example, which is the one we're going to be going through today, is if you're running an e-commerce marketplace with multiple merchants or sellers on it, like in our Meepop example, then particularly if they're selling, a limited supply product or something like that, they may want to double check that they do have the good in stock before actually taking payment. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow customers authorize their payment details for a given product. The merchants are then going to get a chance to make sure they can actually deliver that product. And if they're satisfied that they can do that, they will be able to capture the payment. We're going to need to make one quick change to our database before we get into building out the workflows. And that's for our transaction data type. I'm going to add a new field called dispatched ? And make it a yes or a no field. And the merchant is going to be able to indicate whether or not they've actually dispatched a good. By default, it's going to be no. We're then going to go back to our product page and the buy button there specifically, because implementing this kind of hold on a payment is actually really easy, especially given we've already set up the checkout session creation process and all that. All we need to do is go down to the delayed payment fields here and change this authorize only from no to yes. And what we can do is if we go back to our index page and we just run as a customer again, we can see how this works on a Stripe dashboard end first of all. So let's say we want to buy this Christmas jumper. As a customer, we're going to click buy. Fill out the details really quickly. And at their end, let's click pay. We're brought back to our homepage, but if we look at our Stripe dashboard and look at our payments, you'll see here that the most recent payment from Michael Scott, it's uncaptured. So we haven't actually captured that payment yet. The funds have not left his account and gone into our own. If we look at our bubble database as well, just so you're aware, we're still getting the payment status, and you can see at the moment it's set to unpaid. We're now going to make a couple of changes to our dashboard page. So I'm going to rerun as our merchant again, which is the shop@cranfortech.com account. And if we go to my shop, this is our kind of my transactions section at the moment, but I just want to make a change or two to that to account for the fact that we're now in an application where we want to be able to, capture payment details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the status here. At the moment, this is getting the kind of checkout session payment status. I'm going to change this, and I want to change this to clear that. I want to change it to the payment intent status. And the way you get that is if you go to insert dynamic data, get data from an external API. We want to get the payment details, because if we can get the payment details, we can get the status of the payment. And the difference between the payment intent status and the checkout session payment status is that the payment intent tracks it over time. The original status we were getting was very much unique to that original checkout session, where it was either purchased or it wasn't. But this case is a bit different because we are giving our payment details at one point in time, but not actually capturing it until a later point. Now, we do need to provide a payment intent ID, which we haven't saved down. You could do that. There's definitely ways to save it down, but what I'm going to say here is get data from an external API. We're going to get the checkout session details because we can get the payment intent ID from that. And then we're going to provide the current rose transactions checkout session ID. And then if we refresh our page, I can see we have an issue here. Because we didn't provide the payment intent there, apologies. So under payment intent, you want to get retrieve checkout session details and then go down to payment intent. Now let's refresh our page. And you can see we have succeeded in there. I might actually just change the name of that to make it super clear what this is. And then what I might also do is, at the moment, we're filtering for transactions where the payment status equals paid. But if you think about it, by default, if we're only authorizing a payment and not capturing it, then the default kind of behavior is that it's not going to be paid. So I'm going to remove that filter for now. And now you can see we have two different payment intent statuses. We have succeeded for the transaction that's gone through and subsequently refunded. And then we also have this new one we've just created where it requires capture. So what we can do is, instead of kind of focusing on the refund here, what I'd like to do is change that refund status to dispatched. And we're going to change this to current rose transactions dispatched. And then I'm going to change this refund text to capture. So let's refresh one more time and see how it looks. So you can see here, we have not dispatched this order. I want to be able to capture it now though, much like I did. Actually, not like I did yet. So I should have indicated earlier, what you can do if you want is you can capture payments directly from the Stripe dashboard. So that Michael Scott at testmail.com payment, it's still uncaptured, as is evident here. But what we can do is, if we wanted to, we could just capture it from here. Now, you can really only do this if you're the administrator of the platform itself rather than the merchant, because your average merchant who's building a store on your e-commerce platform, they're not going to have access to this capability. But let's click capture here. Capture the full amount. And then if we refresh our page, what we should see is that requires capture is going to change to succeeded. Now, this isn't ideal because, we're kind of doing one thing on Stripe. It's much better if we can build this programmatically into our actual Bubble application. So to avoid confusion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete those two transactions there. And I'm going to create a brand new one. We will run as a customer again. And we're going to buy classic blue jumper this time. Put these details in again, super quick. Okay, let's click on pay. And let's run again as our merchant, just so we can see what they would see on their dashboard. And if we go down, we can see here they have one transaction, $50 transaction. It requires capture. So what we want to do is let's assume that this merchant has now checked their stock and they do indeed have a Christmas jumper in stock. They're ready to dispatch to the customer. What we want to do is we're going to hook this capture workflow here up to something. You might remember previously we had it hooked up for a refund. That's not what we want to do right now. Instead, what we want to do is go down to plugins and then Stripe Connect, capture a payment. And again, we're going to need to supply the payment intent ID. And what I'm going to do to get that is get data from an external API. We're going to use the Stripe Connect get payment details, which again requires a payment intent ID, which we will get by going to get data from an external API, get checkout session details, and provide current gross transactions checkout session. So again, we're using the checkout session, which we do have saved down, to get the payment intent ID, which we do not have saved down, to get the payment intent status. Bit of a mouthful, but hopefully that makes sense. I'm just going to put in here payment intent. Perfect. And then what we can do is we can just get the status for that. Now, let's say we click this button. We would ideally like this to update if a change has indeed happened. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to then refresh the page just so we'll get a chance to reload this workflow here. And before I do that, what I actually also want to do is I want to make a change to the dispatch. So we can change the current gross transactions. We can change this dispatch from no to yes, because again, the only reason we're clicking this is because we've agreed that, look, we are happy that this item is in stock and we can dispatch it. So let's make that obvious. Okay, let's refresh our page. Let's go down here. You can see payment in status at the moment says required capture. Let's now capture that payment. And we're getting an issue here now. So what are we missing? Let's find out. No such payment intent exists. Okay, so we're missing a payment intent somewhere. And if we go back to our capture payment, what are we doing here? We want to get, of course, we're getting the status rather than the ID. That would make sense. So just to go over that again, we need to provide a payment intent ID here when we're capturing a payment, and I was getting the status instead. Let's refresh our page. Go down, and again, still requires capture. Let's click on capture. You can see the dispatch did change to yes, and you see the payment intent status has now changed to succeeded. And if we look at our Stripe dashboard, go to payments, you'll see that the most recent charge there for Jim Halpert, $50 charge, it has now succeeded, and we should see our $10 fee as well going to our platform from that transaction. So that's how you put a payment on hold. I will say that this only works for up to 7 days. This is maybe not suitable if you're building a services marketplace like Upwork or Fiverr, where it may take beyond 7 days to capture the payment. This is probably more suitable for more short-term holds on cards. You can read the full details on the Stripe website. If you just Google Stripe authorize and capture, it'll give you a full breakdown of everything you need to know on that. Let's move on to delayed payments for services marketplaces like Upwork or Fiverr. And the specific scenario I'm thinking of here is if you are building an application that is a services marketplace and you have freelancers who are offering their services to customers on your marketplace, you're typically going to want the customers to pay for the service immediately, but for the freelancer not to actually get their cut of the transaction until service has been delivered. And the reason we can't really use the authorize and capture method like we went through previously is because, like I said, that does expire after 7 days, the hold on the card. So that's not always going to be appropriate for a services marketplace, where it can take much longer than that to deliver the end product. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at one calling the separate charges and transfers method. Now we'll go through the pros and cons in a second, but if we just go over here, we should see a kind of outline of what this is. You can see more information on the Stripe documentation as well. If you Google separate charges and transfers, there's some great explanations. But at a very high level, what essentially is going to happen is the customer is going to pay for the service immediately You can see the $100 being transferred to the platform. That $100 is going to be held on the platform account. So in our case, it's going to rest in the Meepop account. And then once the service has been completed, the customer is going to mark the service as complete, and then the platform is going to transfer $80 to the freelancer while they hold on to the remaining $20 before Stripe fees, etc. And the reason this is a useful method is, I guess, you have the funds on your platform account straight away. You can transfer funds to multiple parties. So in some really complex marketplaces, you may actually wish to transfer to more than one third party, and you can achieve that with this method. The big con with this approach is that the platform and the connected accounts must be in the same region. So if you have a platform that's based in Europe, but a freelancer who's based in the US and has an American Stripe account, that is not going to work. There's also a bit of complexity in the sense that you need to ensure you have sufficient funds in the platform account to transfer to your freelancers or whoever your merchants may be at all times. So I've made a few changes to our Meepop app. You'll see here, instead of having all the jumpers and other clothing that we had previously, I now have hired the perfect freelancer. We only have one freelancer up here at the moment, but you can see he's offering web design services for $399 and graphic design services for $199. And this is actually the Cranford Tech Store, so a bit of a change of offering for Cranford Tech Store. But if we go to their shop, you can see here, they're the two services that Cranford Tech Shop is currently offering. I'll also show maybe just in the database very quickly. I have added this new data type called service, and you can see there I have the cost, the name, and then the service provider, which is really important because that's what's going to link us to the correct seller account ID. Now, in terms of the actual workflow itself, it's pretty simple. I've created a copy of our product page, which you might remember was this page here, and I've called it service. And if we actually just run as the customer, we can see what that's going to look like. So I'll go to all users, run as the customer account, go back to the home page, and let's say that our customer wants to hire us for some web design. When they click on this hire button, we're going to be brought to a very similar workflow to that what we've seen previously for the products. And just to show you what's actually happening there underneath the hood, go to design, click on hire, and check out that workflow. Once again, we're creating a transaction exactly the same. A tiny difference on this one is we're continuing to embed it in our own app, which is why this is set to yes and why these two fields are blank. But one difference is if we scroll down here, we're going to need to change the charge type to separate charge and transfer. That's really important. We're also going to need to set the authorize only back to no. Otherwise, it's pretty similar. We're saving down the amount, the seller account ID and the checkout session ID, and we're navigating to the checkout page. So I'm going to hire for $399. I'm expecting to see that come through on our payment side as succeeded, but I'm expecting the full amount to go to the platform and for our connected account not to get any initially. So let's see how that goes. Brought to our checkout page. And you can see I made the classic mistake here of not multiplying our service by 100, and we're ending up with a $399 charge, which is obviously not what we want. So let's fix that quickly. When we're creating the checkout session, you can see for the platform fee, I did the correct thing and multiplied it by 100, but I forgot to do that for the price itself. So I'm going to multiply that by 100. Then when we refresh, we should see $399 this time when we hire Cranford Tech for some web design. And let's fill this out quickly. Okay, let's pay for that web design service. And we're brought back. Let's take a quick look at our database to see how that looks. And under transactions, you can see there payment status is indeed paid. And if we go to payments here and we refresh, we should see a $399 payment come through. And you can see it has. Now, if we were taking 20% of this as a platform fee, which is what we've said we were going to do, I would expect just under $80 of this to be collected in fees. But as I mentioned earlier, that's not going to be the case. because we use that separate charges and transfer method, the entirety of this payment is now going to be sitting on the platform account. Now, let's assume that our customer is satisfied with our web design service and that we've delivered whatever we were doing for them, and that they're happy enough to mark the job as complete. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to give the customer access to some sort of button that will allow them to mark the job as complete. Now, we do have a dashboard built for the seller of services on the dashboard page, and realistically, you're going to be putting this on a customer-facing dashboard if you're building out an actual application. But just give you a sense of how this works, and rather than building a brand new dashboard, I'm going to use this one for demonstration purposes. First of all, I'm going to change this button here from capture to transfer. And in my database, I'm going to change dispatched to job complete. And then I'm going to refresh my page here, and I'm going to rerun as the service provider, in this case, shop@grandprotect.com. So you can see here the latest transaction, which is really the most relevant one. And in fact, I might delete those two previous ones. Let's go back. And you can see the payment has succeeded, but the dispatch is currently marked as no. So this is my indication that the job hasn't yet been completed. Now, let's assume that this is a customer-facing dashboard and that they're satisfied with the web design services. What we can do is we can build a workflow so that when transfer is clicked, we're going to transfer the 80% of the value of the transaction to the freelancer. So what we need to do for that is we need to go to our dashboard, go to design, and on transfer here, we're going to edit this workflow. And instead of doing Stripe Connect capture payment, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to delete that. Going to delete that. I'm going to go down to plugins and do Stripe Connect create a transfer. And then the value of the transfer is going to be equal to the current row's transactions amount, and then we're going to multiply that by 0.8 because we're not giving the freelancer 100% of the value of the transaction. We're only giving them 80% so that we can hold on to our 20% as a platform. Currency is actually really important. We need to make sure that this matches the initial currency that the transaction took place in. I've been using dollars throughout this tutorial, so I'm going to put in USD there. If you wish, you can save down the currency of each transaction if you're really getting into a complicated marketplace where you're selling in multiple currencies. Unless you need to, I would advise against that. Keep things simple, I would say. But you could save down different currencies to the transactions and reference them here. And then finally, probably the most important one is the Stripe account ID. So what we need to do here is get the current row's transactions, seller account ID. So once we click that button, we're hopefully going to create the transfer as we wish. I also then want to make changes to a thing. The thing I want to change is the current row's transactions, job complete. I want to change that to yes, and I keep falling for that. The thing I want to actually change is current row's transaction, and then I want to change the job complete to yes. So let's refresh our dashboard. Let's assume that we're the customer looking at this job here and that we're satisfied with the job. We're going to click on transfer. You may wish to call it something like mark job complete instead or something like that, but let's click transfer. You can see their workflow is running. I can see dispatch has changed to yes. And if we go to our Stripe dashboard, we should see that $399, we knew that payment went through, but what's going to be key here is where the collected fees has shown up. So like I said, it should be just under $80. So let's take a look. And we can see that hasn't happened just yet. And the reason that hasn't happened, and I'm going to be correcting myself here, but there's not going to be any collected fees. If you think about it, the transaction in its entirety went to us and is then up to us to transfer on to the merchant. So the kind of telltale sign of whether this is worked or not, it's not going to be collected fees, it's going to be in Connect. And if we look at shop@cranfordtech.com and look at the most recent payment, we should see that a big enough payment went through for $319. That's our 80% of the $400, which leaves about $80 in the actual platform account, which is then the platform's cut of the overall transaction. So that's worked out, and we can see on our dashboard again that that job is now marked as complete. You can change the language there from dispatch to job complete just to make it look a bit more in line. So the very last thing I want to show you today is splitting subscription payments in a marketplace. So let's say you have an app like a Substack where people create content on your Bubble app and they sell a monthly subscription to that content, but you want to take a cut of each transaction. You can implement that functionality with Stripe Connect and using the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin. And we're going to go through how to do something like that. The example we're going to do today, in keeping with what we've been building so far, is going to be more of an e-commerce based example. But if you do want to see a specific Substack style example, if you go to the plugin page for the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin, what you'll see is if you scroll down to demo app and instructions, you can actually find a real live example of a Substack style app. If you click on Substack subscription marketplace example and then click on that button there, you're going to be brought to that example. You can see the editor and everything behind it. There's also a pretty detailed demo video already on marketplace subscription payments. So that's about a 50-minute long video. I'm not going to spend 50 minutes here going into all the details, but I will show you what you need to get up and running with your subscription marketplace application. The first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to create a new data type in our database called subscription. We're going to add a few fields to this. We're going to identify the customer, who's going to be a user. We're going to identify the subscription seller, who's going to be the store owner. So again, Cranford Tech Shop is going to be the subscription seller in this example. We are going to add a subscription ID to it. This is going to be a unique Stripe field that will be used to identify subscriptions. We're going to link it to a specific product. That type is going to be product. And finally, we're going to give a status, which is going to be really important. We're just going to say it's going to be type text. I've built the app so far based on it being a kind of one-off purchase, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I've now assumed the Meepop has turned into a jumper subscription marketplace, where if you pay $40 a month, you get a new Christmas jumper every month. I've kept most of the rest of the setup here pretty identical. You can see around the product page, but I've just changed it. Instead of getting a one-off Christmas jumper, you're now going to get a monthly subscription to Christmas jumpers. The subscribe button here isn't currently hooked up to anything, so that's what we're going to work on next. If we go to subscribe and we click on edit workflow, the very first thing we're going to do is the same thing we did when we were dealing with one-off purchases. We're simply going to create a new thing, and the new thing is going to be a transaction. However, we're also going to create another new thing. This time around, we're going to be creating a subscription. And we can begin to add fields to this subscription. For example, we can identify that the customer is going to be the current user. We can identify that the product is going to be the current page's product. So again, in this example, it's going to be our monthly subscription to Christmas jumpers. We can identify that the seller of this subscription is going to be equal to the current page's products store. So again, it's going to be the Cranford Tech store, the Cranford Tech shop in this particular example. And then we're going to create the checkout session. Now, for much of this tutorial today, we've been using the Stripe Connect create checkout session action. We're not using that here. We have a different create checkout session action specifically for subscriptions, just because there's quite a few nuances involved in creating subscriptions that aren't there in the regular checkout session. The rest of the action is very, very similar to what you have seen previously if you've been following along with the rest of the tutorial, but I am going to go through each of these fields one by one. So if you're picking it up from scratch, you will be able to understand what's going on. Success URL, that's the URL the user is going to be redirected to after completing the payment form. I'm going to type in website home URL. And much like we did when we were saving down transaction details for our one-off purchases, we're going to put in a couple of page URL parameters to help us pull down information when the user is returned to that success URL. The first thing we're going to put in is transaction. And we're going to give the unique ID that was created when we created the transaction in step 1. So we'll go to result of step 1 and its unique ID. We're also going to add in a page URL parameter for subscription, just because we also want to save down some data relating to the subscription when the user is brought back to the home page. And again, we're going to say result of step 2, and we're going to say unique ID. Going to do the exact same thing for the cancel URL. Stripe account ID is going to be quite simple. It's going to be current pages products, creators, seller account ID. The plan name, so what are we going to call our monthly subscription plan to Christmas jumpers? I think the best thing to do is just take the product name, so current pages product name, click out, and then we'll put in the dash and just say monthly subscription. The price in cents of this subscription is going to be equal to the current pages products price, and then you might remember we need to multiply it by 100 in order to get it into dollars, because by default price is going to take this in cents. Now, if you were following along with the earlier part of the tutorial, you will have noted that the platform fee previously we had to calculate it in cents ourselves. It's a bit different here. You can see the platform fee is actually in percentage, so we can specify what percentage the platform is going to take from each monthly subscription payment. I'm going to type in 15 for this. Currency, I'm just going to go with USD as we've been doing so far. And then on behalf of, I'm going to leave as no. I'm also going to do all this in the Stripe hosted page rather than embedding it in a checkout session on our own application. It makes it a bit easier when we're coming back to save down data later. We can update the subscription that we created in step 1. What we can do is we can add in its amount, which is going to be the result of step 3, its amount. We can add in the checkout session ID, which is going to be the result of step 3's checkout session ID. And we can also add in the seller account ID, which is going to be equal to current pages products, creators, seller account ID. Just looking, I think those are the fields we want to add in for now. Yeah, that'll do us for now. And then finally, much like we've been doing up until now, we're going to open an external website and we're going to go to the URL that was created in step 3. So let's refresh our page. And let's make sure we're actually running as a customer here, just in case we were logged in as an actual merchant. Go back to the home page and pick a monthly subscription. Let's go with the cardigan subscription, where you get a monthly subscription to a cardigan, and we'll subscribe to it. And you can see we're brought to the Stripe checkout session page. I'm going to fill out these details really quickly. And now let's subscribe to this plan. So that's gone through on the Stripe side. We're now being brought back to our home page, and you can see from the page URL we have the unique ID of the transaction up there, and we also have the unique ID of the subscription up there. Let's take a look at our payments. So we go back and we take a look at payments, and let's refresh our page. Oh, no need to. We can see a subscription for $50 has gone through there, and if I remember right, 15% of that, which would be about $750, would go to our platform. And indeed, you can see $750 has gone to the shop at cranfortech.com account. Let's take a look at our database next, because we saved in some of the information related to this, but not quite all of it. So you can see here, this is indeed the most recent transaction. And we filled out all these fields here. We have a seller account ID in there. We have the checkout session ID. We have the payment status, which is all useful. But what we don't have is under subscriptions. We've just created a subscription here. We don't have the subscription ID and we don't have the status of the subscription. And this is really important because we want to know if this subscription is active or whether it's been cancelled, whether the card is bounced, whether there's an issue with the payment. So we need to figure out a way to get the subscription status in here. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to get the subscription ID first of all, and then we're going to use that to get the subscription status. Let's go back to our homepage. This is where the user is returned to after they have completed the transaction. And you see at the moment we're running this workflow when the page is loaded and when transaction is in the page URL and it's not empty. So that workflow is being run. And in fact, that's why we've updated the payment status. We went through this earlier, but essentially we're using an API call to update the information. We're going to do something similar. We're going to copy this. We're going to paste it because what we're going to do for this workflow here is we're going to say when subscription is in the page URL, much like it is here, and it's not empty, then we're going to do something else. And what we're going to do is we're going to make changes to a thing. The thing we're going to change is a subscription. And we want to get the first subscription we can find where its unique ID is equal to get data from the page URL. And what essentially want to do here is we want to get the subscription unique ID, which is going to be in the page URL. So we're looking through our database, we're finding a subscription that has this unique ID, and we're changing it. What are we changing? We're changing, first of all, the subscription ID, and we're going to use a get data from an external API call here. And we're going to say Stripe Connect, retrieve checkout session details. The checkout session is going to equal to get, in fact, no, the checkout session ID is going to equal to do a search for transactions, and we want to get the first transaction where the unique ID is equal to what we're seeing in the page URL. So again, we're down a couple of layers. I know it's quite complex, but essentially what we're doing is we're looking for transactions where the unique ID is equal to this. We're taking the checkout session ID associated with that, so we can get the first item. We can get checkout session ID. And then we can get subscription. So I'm going to refresh my page, and because I already have these loaded up, I should actually see the subscription ID come in here. So let's refresh our page. Hopefully that workflow is run. When we click refresh data, we get the subscription ID, which we do. Now we want to update the subscription status. So very simple. All we need to do is we need to, again, make changes to a thing. We want to make a change to the subscription we created in step 1. And we want to change its status to get data from an external API. Much simpler this time. We're simply going to use Stripe Connect, retrieve a subscription. And then we need to give them the subscription ID. We can do that by saying this subscription's subscription ID. And all we want to do here is get its status. Maybe before I do that, there is a whole bunch of other information you can get here, which can be useful if you're building a kind of complex marketplace. But just for our purposes today, I'm going to get the status. Now, because I know the user has successfully subscribed to our cardigan plan, I'm expecting the subscription to be active. There shouldn't be any issues with it. We know it's gone through. So now when I go back into our database, I'm hoping to see the word active pop in here. And sure enough, you can see that's what's happened. So the very last thing we're going to need to do is allow our customers to cancel their subscriptions. They will need some way of doing this, and if you can do it in your Bubble app, all the better. So what I've done is I've created a modified version of our merchant dashboard for our customers, and I've listed out all the subscriptions that they are subscribed to in this table here. Just taking a quick look at it, what we're doing is we're setting the type of content on this table to be subscriptions, and we're searching for all subscriptions where the customer is equal to the current user. You can see there's only one there at the moment. And the way we're going to manage our subscriptions in terms of cancellations and seeing invoices is by using the Stripe billing portal. It's a really nice feature from Stripe that lets you access a page hosted on their website where you can update your payment methods, see invoices, cancel subscriptions. It's super easy to use. All we're going to do is when we click on the Manage Subscription button, we're again going to go down to Plugins, and we're going to say Stripe Connect Self-Service Portal. There's two things we need to fill out here. There's the customer ID, which we haven't yet actually saved down, and there's also the return URL. For the return URL, I'm simply going to send them back to this URL. And then for the customer ID, we need to figure out a way to get this saved down in our database for our users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to our user data type. I'm going to create a new field called customer ID. I'm going to give it a text field type. And then you might remember when we were initially creating the subscriptions on the product page, when they were clicking on subscribe, we were using the unique IDs of the transaction and the subscription to pull in data for the for the transaction and the subscription themselves. The good news is we can also use these parameters to pull in data like the customer ID. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to our index page. When we're changing the transaction, we can also make changes to the current user. So we go to account, make changes to current user, and then customer ID is going to be equal to get data from an external API. Stripe Connect, retrieve checkout session details. And the checkout session ID is going to be equal to result of step 1, it's checkout session ID. And then if you scroll down here, we should be able to get customer as a field. So we will actually need to subscribe to another product just to get that saved down. So let's do that really quickly. We've already subscribed to the cardigan, so let's go over to Christmas jumper this time around. Click on subscribe. Fill in our details quickly. And let's subscribe to that plan. Brought back to the home page, and hopefully now we should see in our app data, we should see a customer ID there for our most recent customer. Just expand that out a bit, and you can see that's there, which means that we should now be able to fill out that customer ID. And all we can say is current users customer ID. Now, before we go and cancel our subscription, we want to think about how to update this status field, because this is not going to get updated automatically in our bubble database in a second. And in fact, what I might do first of all is let's just cancel one and I'll show you how it looks. So let's go to our dashboard. We now have 2 subscriptions. Let's go and manage them. That should really be managed subscriptions, but we don't need to worry about that for now. And of course, one thing we forgot to do was we did create self-service portal, but we also need to navigate to it. So let's open that up. Result of step 1, it's URL. Refresh our page. And let's go there now. So this is the Stripe billing portal. This is where you can manage your subscriptions. You can see here we have 1 plan here at the moment. The reason we don't have 2 is we hadn't given the customer ID the first time around. So Stripe doesn't actually know at the moment that these are 1 customer. They think there's 2 separate plans at the moment for 2 separate customers. But going forward, if we were to subscribe to a new plan, then this would update. But what I did want to show you was if we click cancel here, and before I do, maybe just look at the plan in Stripe itself. So let's refresh our Stripe dashboard. Let's look at our customers. And Ted Lasso at testmail.com was the most recent one. And if we go into overview, you can see here that they do have a subscription created there. Let's click on that. And we can see the subscription by clicking on the ID there. So this is that subscription. You can see it's active at the moment. Now, if we click on cancel here, it is going to cancel the plan on Stripe. And if we go here and click on refresh, that is going to change from active to cancel, I'm guessing, which it has. But if we look at our Bubble database, nothing has happened yet. That's because Bubble isn't in sync with Stripe. It's not talking to Stripe and it doesn't know that it needs to update its status. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, whenever we're back on the customer dashboard, I'm going to say when the page is loaded. I'm not going to put any conditions in because I really want this to happen every time. We're going to say make changes to a list of things. And the list of things we're changing are subscriptions. We're going to have to do a search for subscriptions, and we're going to change all subscriptions where customer is equal to the current user. What we're going to do is we're going to change the status to get data from an external API. We're going to do the retrieve a subscription call, and we're going to provide this subscription's ID as necessary, and then we're going to just look for status here, and that should update. So I'm hoping now when we go back to our dashboard that we're going to see this workflow kick off in the background and update our subscription statuses. And you can see there the Christmas jumper has cancelled, cardigan remains active because again we haven't cancelled that one. So you can also use webhooks, I will say, to cancel subscriptions automatically where you wouldn't have to run a workflow like this. I do have a video on using webhooks with Stripe. I will link to it below, but this is an alternative method as well and a fairly straightforward one. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you've learned a bit about how to integrate Stripe Connect into your Bubble application. And if you do have any questions, you can let me know in the comment section.